Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Daily Survival. My name is Faraz Padal. I'll be in your company for the next 45 minutes. Well, today we have a special guest. Currently, the ANC and its headquarters, Luthuli House, is going through a crisis. Staff have not been paid for quite a few months, and just yesterday, one of its members, an MK-MVA member and exposed person, Carl Niehaus, was dismissed by the ruling party. He is my guest today to unpack what is currently happening at the moment and, of course, to share his grievances after he was dismissed. Mr. Niehaus, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Faraz, and thank you for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. Mr. Niehaus, before we go, obviously, to discuss the actual topic that we have, one of your colleagues and longtime friends, Mr. Kebe Mapachwe, passed away last week. Of course, he was laid to rest on Sunday. May God have mercy on his soul and make it easy on his family. Mr. Niehaus, just describe the sort of person Mr. Mapachwe was and, of course, his contribution in the struggle against apartheid.
Comrade Kebe Mapachwe dedicated his whole life to the liberation struggle. He started in the youth movement. He was part of the Soweto Youth Congress. In fact, he was also one of the founding members of the Congress of South African Students. He went into exile in 1977, and he ended up joining Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the African National Congress. He underwent training in Angola, in the Soviet Union, in the former German Democratic Republic, and also in Cuba. He came back and he dedicated his life to the well-being of his fellow MK veterans. He was very disturbed by the manner in which the African National Congress was neglecting MK military veterans. In 2007, he started the Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association, together with a number of other ANC leaders. Among them was also the now Minister Ayanda Tlotlo. And at the same time, he also helped with the establishment of the South African National Military Veterans Association, SANDA, and also piloted in 2011 the Military Veterans Act number 8 through Parliament that secured the rights of military veterans. So a remarkable man, someone who dedicated his life to his fellow comrades, and a very warm person, someone who I've had many laughs with, who was a true comrade, and right up to the last days of his life was working for his fellow military veterans.
Yeah, and may his soul rest in peace, and may his legacy obviously continue within the ranks of the MK-MVA. So let's go obviously now to the main discussion, Mr. Niehaus. Yesterday, you had received a dismissal letter, of course, from the African National Congress. Now, everyone knows you, Mr. Niehaus, as being part of the MK-MVA, being an NEC member and spokesperson. So your duties within Luthuli House, for those who don't know, what are the duties that you carry out being there at Luthuli House?
Well, my job description in Luthuli House is that of Manager Special Projects in the Office of the Secretary General. And I've been working in that position since the beginning of 2018. So I was very surprised when I received a call yesterday afternoon at about 1:30 from the General Manager of the African National Congress, Phoebe Potgieter, informing me that they're sending me a letter which is going to state that I will be summarily dismissed and that I have to give reasons why they should not do so 2.5 hours further at 4 o'clock. Now, this is a most unreasonable approach. There's no hearing. There is no provisions in terms of the Labour Act being followed. I'm simply being told we are going to dismiss you, and you better tell us very, very quickly whether you should not be dismissed. Well, despite that very unreasonable deadline, I did meet the deadline. I did write a letter to the management of the African National Congress and indicated to them why they should not dismiss me. But hardly an hour after I've sent that letter, I then received a letter from Comrade Phoebe Potgieter, saying that I have been dismissed. Now, this is extraordinary. It is not the behavior of a political party or liberation movement. It is the kind of behavior you would have expected from a military junta. And the reason why this has been done to me, apparently, is because I was prepared to blow the whistle on illegal activity in terms of financial management by the management of the African National Congress with regards to the handling not just of the salaries of the ANC staff members, but specifically with regards to various statutory crimes. And I want to indicate those to you. The Unemployment Insurance Fund Act, the Pensions Fund Act, pay-as-you-earn regulations, and also the income tax. All of these are matters where deductions have been made from my payslip and the payslip of fellow employees. I've got my payslip here with me, and I can read to you that deductions have been made as far as pay-as-you-earn is concerned, Unemployment Insurance Fund, and also the Provident Fund, and by the way, also medical aid. In all these instances, the monies have been deducted, but they've not been paid over to the relevant authorities managing these different pieces of legislation. Now, that is fraudulent to indicate on a payslip that monies have been deducted and they not to have paid it over. It is also surprising that the various institutions that manage these the legislation have not brought the ANC to book for it. So there is another concern and probably another criminal act. So under the circumstances, myself and a number of other members or employees of the African National Congress have said, look, we've raised these issues and we are aware that the ANC Staff Association have raised these issues. There's no race. The national office bearers and the management of the African National Congress are not addressing these matters. And these matters have very serious consequences. There are dependents of ANC employees who've passed on, who have not received Provident Fund payouts, and who are in dire straits. And this has been going on literally for years. So under the circumstances, we felt, look, we've reached the end of our tether. The only route that we have now, and it's also a responsibility that we have, because we are citizens of this country, and when we become aware of illegal action, we should report such to the South African Police Service, is now to go to the police, lay charges, let the police investigate these matters, and if the police finds that their crime has been committed, that those who have committed these crimes must be prosecuted. Now, that is whistleblower. And surely within the law and within the express position that President Cyril Ramaphosa had taken, that the ANC should be fighting crime, this should be welcomed. But instead of welcoming it, these draconian measures have been taken in indecent haste against. I have, as I indicated to you, in contravention of labor law, been fired, and I'm now faced with a situation where I have to take this matter and appeal on it, which I certainly will. But I'm clear that this is an attempt not only to intimidate myself, but it's also an attempt to intimidate any other ANC employee who would like to take action with regards to this mismanagement of ANC funds and the general disregard that there is for ANC employees.
Mr. Nyawo, I mean, you're speaking about, I know you've spoken about it also on various other media houses. The fact that the basic, of course, when you get your pay slip, you know, obviously it's your salary, it's tax, UIF, PAYE, and all of those that need to be deducted by these various organizations. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this is not really monies that are going to these organizations, how are they, number one, as the organizations, turning a blind eye to it? And number two, how can the ANC, which is the ruling party of South Africa, sort of like saying, okay, it's fine, we don't have to pay? That is really something that, as you say, it is equal to fraud.
It's extraordinary. And you're quite correctly summarizing it. On the one hand, the ANC as employer, the management of the ANC, who have taken this extraordinary action by omission, and it is guilty. And on the other hand, also those organizations that should have followed up on these matters and in fact should have brought the ANC to book had not done so. So the question also arises, if they have been put under pressure not to do so because of the status of the African National Congress as the ruling party. And let me hasten to add, it is not my intention to attack the ANC as an organization. I'm not here dealing with the issue of the ANC. I'm not an enemy of the ANC. I'm a member of the ANC, a veteran of the ANC, someone who joined the ANC when I was 19 years old. For 42 years now, I've been a member of the ANC. But this is serious mismanagement and criminal conduct by senior management of the African National Congress. And that is why we said that we're going to lay these charges against the top 5 of the ANC, the national office bearers of the African National Congress, and they have to for this kind of financial mismanagement that has happened, because this kind of actions puts the ANC into disrepute. The fact that ANC salaries have not been paid, the fact that the African National Congress is apparently in contravention of legislation in our country, is a national and international news item. It is a matter that besmirches the name of this proud liberation movement. And it indicates the failure of the top leadership of the national executive and the national office bearers to execute their duties. And there has to be consequences. If these leaders are unable or unprepared to carry out their duties properly, if they are not prepared to be the custodians of the proud liberation history of the African National Congress, then they must go. They must either ship up or they must ship out.
Well, we're just getting started with Mr. Carl Niehaus, of course, on his current dismissal of the ANC, giving us an idea of currently what is happening in Luthuli House. After the break, the conversation continues. Do stay tuned to the Daily Survival. Welcome back to the Daily Survival. I'm in conversation with Carl Niehaus, and a member of the MKMVA and its spokesperson. He's also part of the National Executive Committee of the Military Wings Veteran Organization. Mr. Niehaus, I want to talk through, of course, the warning and the eventual dismissal. Because in any Labor Relation Act, as you mentioned earlier on in our first part of our discussion, there needs to be how do we look at it, a disciplinary hearing. Do you feel aggrieved that there was no real disciplinary hearing by the general manager of the ANC and the structures and, of course, the human resources department in trying to, first of all, find a resolution, and secondly, trying to resolve this internally? Do you feel aggrieved by that?
Of course I'm aggrieved. And I'm concerned for myself personally, because this is an injustice towards myself. But I'm also seriously concerned for the sake of all the other employees of the African National Congress, because if this can happen to me, it surely can happen to any one of them. And this is an act of intimidation. There was no hearing. There was an action which was nothing else but bringing a sledgehammer down on my head. And then to have the national spokesperson of the African National Congress going on to national television stations saying, well, he's gone and we don't care. If he wants to complain about it, he can send his lawyers, is so dismissive of labor law. Under the circumstances, it is extraordinary that the African National Congress, which is in alliance with the Congress of South African Trade Unions, and which has piloted labor legislation in order to improve the lives of workers, can now flaunt that very same legislation and act in this manner. And I think that all of us, including the labor unions, have to sit up and take notice of this and need to take action. It's not just about me as an individual. It is about a ruling party through the mismanagement by senior managers that is now putting the whole labor dispensation in South Africa at risk.
Mr. Nyaws, I'm reading Judge John Deed's tweet here to, of course, the tweet that you posted quite a few hours ago, of course, with the intention of laying criminal charges to be brought against the office bearers of the ANC. I am going to get to that in a bit. There's two things that he mentions which is quite interesting. The fact that a threat to dismiss without cause on 2 hours' notice is not constructive dismissal. When it happens, it'll be unfair dismissal or even unfair labor practice. Second, failure to pay pension contributions deducted from salaries of the workers is a crime by the ANC. Approaching the CCMA, of course, would be one of the more logical ways to do it. So the CCMA and the Labour Court, what are your outcomes? What are you expecting in terms of the outcomes for them to rule in your case? Because as you say, it's not just one person. It could be quite a few if, of course, the cause does continue.
Well, I'm consulting with my lawyers. And they will advise me what the right course of action is. But as I've said earlier, I believe that the trade union movement in general in South Africa has to sit up and take notice. And I believe that workers' rights in general is here under threat because there's a very simple rule. They do it to one, eventually they end up doing it to everyone. And we cannot allow this to happen. So yes, I will go through various appeal processes. And as I've indicated, if need be, I will also approach our courts for relief.
Mr. Nyaws, it's no secret that, of course, you are a strong supporter of former President Jacob Zuma. You've said it before that, you know what, you are a supporter of him because what you feel is happening to him is quite unfair by the courts of South Africa. Now, a lot of people say that there is the two factions within the ANC, and within that faction of the ANC, yourself being part of it, along with Secretary General of the ANC, Ace Magashule, Supra Mahumapelo, Andile Lungisa from the Eastern Cape. Am I correct in saying that there's a purge against members of that faction of the ANC right now? Mr. Nyaws, we seem to have lost you there. Mr. Nyaws, we're going to have to ask you to unmute yourself, please. Mr. Nyaws?
Sorry.
Yeah, did you? No, it's fine. Did you get my question?
I heard your question,
yes.
although there's been interruptions, but I can try and answer.
Okay, not a problem.
Of course, the fear is. Of course, the fear is that there is a process of purging of those who do not agree with the dominant current faction within the African National Congress. We've seen that in terms of the actions that have been taken against President Zuma, against Mr. Bongani Bongo, against Mr. Supra Mahumapelo, and also against the Secretary General of the African National Congress, Comrade Ace Magashule. In every instance, there has been an intolerance and unpreparedness to follow correct procedures. In the case of Comrade Supra Mahumapelo, eventually the National Disciplinary Committee did rule that the correct procedures for him to be suspended had not been followed, and that there was indecent haste to act against him, and obviously that was for factional political purposes. I understand that despite that ruling, there are still those within the Northwest Province and within the ANC in general who are trying to reinstitute those disciplinary steps against Comrade Supra. And so forth, and so it goes on. So there's clearly a process of purging of members of the African National Congress, and those who purge do not care whether they follow the correct procedures. They are acting in an arrogant and triumphalist manner, and they are simply trying to get rid of anyone who doesn't sing from the same hymn book with them. This is not democracy, and this is not the African National Congress that I knew and that I joined. The ANC that I joined was an organization that believed in internal debate and discussion, that allowed internal democracy, and allowed people to express their views. Now we have a situation of an organization that is acting more and more like a dictatorship, and that is truly a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, we are going to continue this conversation with Mr. Carl Niehaus. I just saw a tweet now also from Fikile Mbalula, who's also part of the ANC NEC, and he's of course the current Minister of Transport, asking what is your job description, and he replies to the tweet saying, I honestly don't know what you're doing at Luthuli House, maybe an organizer of marches. I'm going to get Mr. Niehaus's comment on that just after.
I'll respond to that.
Okay, you can respond. I'll give you 2 minutes, Mr. Niehaus, to that.
I'm not employed by Mr. Mbalula.
Yeah.
He has acted in very silly ways against me in the past. I've got 2 defamation cases against him to the tune now of 18 million rands. And I suggest that he puts a guard in front of his mouth before we push it right over 20 million rand.
No, thank you, Mr. Niehaus, for that. Yeah, on Twitter, you always have an option to go ahead and voice your opinion, your expressions. That's the beauty of South Africa. Well, coming up after the break, my conversation continues with Mr. Niehaus. We're going to be touching on the current salary crisis that is happening in Luthuli House. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Daily Survival. My conversation with Mr. Carl Niehaus is continuing. Mr. Niehaus, we have to talk salaries because this is, of course, the crux of the problem that is currently happening in Luthuli House. We've, 3 to 4 months, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe you can correct me on that. And the problem is that you have workers there who are breadwinners of so many families. And the fact that they're not getting their salary just is such a sad indictment of an organization, as you mentioned, the oldest liberation movement in the continent.
It is truly sad, and it is heartbreaking to talk to some of those workers who only rely on their salaries to make ends meet. I know of comrades who have lost their houses, who've lost their cars, who have not been able to take care of their families. Their children cannot continue to go to school. And there seems to be no care from the side of the top management of the African National Congress. They set up meetings, they cancel those meetings in the person of the Treasurer General, Comrade Paul Mashatile. He doesn't even engage with the staff association. He sends delegations and people to go and talk to them. He doesn't provide any clear message on how this problem will be resolved. I can tell you that on Thursday, that is yesterday, there was supposedly to be a meeting between the national office bearers and the ANC Staff Association. In fact, the meeting that led myself and those who wanted to lay the charges yesterday against the ANC to postpone that process. By 4 o'clock, the ANC national office bearers just informed the Staff Association that they no longer have time to meet with them. They didn't even provide another time when such a meeting will take place. And in the meantime, this devastation in the lives of ANC employees are continuing. Now, yes, the salary issue is crucial, and it is an indication of the financial failure and the lack of financial management on the side of the African National Congress's senior managers. But it is not the only critical issue. You've also recently seen how the ANC failed to abide by the Electoral Act and failed to register candidates for the local government elections in no less than 35 municipalities. And there's a number of other municipalities where partially they also haven't managed to register candidates. This is a very serious matter. It means that the top leadership of the ANC are failing to give leadership to the organization. They're failing to keep the African National Congress afloat. And if they continue to behave in the manner that they do now, they will end up destroying, as you said, this oldest liberation movement in Africa. Now, us as members of the African National Congress who love this organization cannot allow that to happen. We have got a responsibility to say enough is enough. The action that I and a few other staff members are undertaking to go and lay charges of criminal activity against those national office bearers and senior managers is in the light of this attempt to save the organization. But I believe that the general membership of the African National Congress now has to stand up within their branches at a grassroots level and say this has to come to an end. This leadership has failed us, and the time has come for this leadership to resign and to go, and a new leadership to take over that can correct all these wrongs that are currently being committed.
Mr. Neus, you mentioned Paul Mashatile, and of course his role is that of Treasurer General. Now we know the ANC is a donor fund organization, meaning that it relies on funds. We've seen the ANC going in doing the crowdfunding initiative to try and get money to pay the salaries. But even though Paul Mashatile's role as a Treasurer General, it's his role, it's his duty to go ahead and collect money, get money, wherever it's from a legal means, of course, doing the necessary due diligence, and of course, other factors with regards to that. So surely the buck stops with him, doesn't it?
Yes, the buck stops with Comrade Paul Mashatile and with the rest of the national office bearers. They have been elected by the last national conference of the ANC, the 54th National Conference, to take good care of the organization and to lead it. And they are failing. So Comrade Paul is definitely one of the most important responsible persons, and you can, with some justification, say that the buck stops with him. But similarly, it should also stop with the rest of the national officials of the African National Congress. In the instance, for instance, of the registration problems of candidates, that buck should stop with the whole national office bearers, but especially with the person who is now in charge of this process, which is the Deputy Secretary General, Comrade Jesse Duarte. I'm not referring here to the Secretary General, Comrade Ace Magashule, because, as you know, he's been suspended and he's been removed from the administration of the ANC before that registration process started.
Mr. Neus, you mentioned, of course, of the registration process with the IEC, over 30 metros and municipalities where the ANC has not registered in. By that happening, am I correct in saying that that sort of weakens the party ahead of the local government elections set to take place in November?
Of course it does, and it is a question of serious concern for us who want to see the African National Congress to perform as best as possible. We would love the ANC to get a resounding victory in the upcoming local government elections on the 1st of November. But if you're faced with a situation where in a number of municipalities you already don't have candidates registered, you are on the back foot, and it damages the organization, not just in those municipalities. Obviously, it does damage them there, but it damages the overall image of the organization. And this is a matter of serious mismanagement and failure. And as I've said earlier, The time has come for consequences because of such failures. We cannot act as if people who have failed the organization so dismally then can simply just continue as if nothing has happened.
Mr. Niels, I want to talk about the workers because, you feel for them, not just as a citizen of South Africa, but somebody who is also a tax-paying citizen who knows what it is, when you go through these problems, it really is something that affects families, whether you are married, not married, whatever the case may be. Describe for us, how are they feeling at this very moment? Because it cannot be easy for these workers who are not just workers, but they people who believe in the ANC and want to see the ANC going forward. It's disheartening, isn't it?
It's deeply disheartening, and those workers are torn apart. On the one hand, they want to take action in order to defend their salaries, and of course, they have to protect their families because those salaries they need in order to take care of their families. On the other hand, they love the African National Congress, and they do not want to be seen as those who take action that can damage the ANC. So you can see truly how they're torn apart. And you can hear when you speak to these employees of the African National Congress, the deep sense of frustration and hurt that they are feeling. And they also find it very difficult to believe that this organization that they dedicated their lives to, that they have truly believed in and continue to believe in, can behave in this callous manner towards them. As I've said to you, I've spoken to ANC employees who haven't got food on the table, who have lost their rental accommodation, and some of them even the houses that they've owned because the banks moved in and repossessed the houses. And there doesn't seem to be any understanding from the side of the top leadership of the ANC what is happening to these workers. I think part of the problem is that those top leadership members of the African National Congress are very well endowed people. They have made millions of rands. As you know, the ANC is now being led by a billionaire. And they've lost touch with the ground. They don't understand anymore what it means to be reliant on a salary. For them, even those who do earn a salary from the ANC, that salary is like pocket money because they've got millions in the bank that they can live on. But that is not the case for the majority of workers, employees of the African National Congress. And when your leadership cannot show sympathy and empathy, it is a serious indication of decay. It reminds me of that history of the revolution, of the French Revolution, where Queen Marie Antoinette said, when people said, but the people don't have bread to eat, she said, well, let them then have cake to eat. And that is exactly what this national office bearers of our organization are doing and what our billionaire president is doing. They are not showing care for the people they should care about and people who've dedicated their lives to the African National Congress.
Yeah, amongst eating cakes, Marie Antoinette also used to bath in honey. So yeah, a classic case of the rich getting richer and unfortunately the poor getting poorer. After the break, our conversation wraps up with Mr. Carl Niehaus. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Daily Survival. My conversation with Mr. Carl Niehaus is continuing. Mr. Niehaus, the next plan of action you have said, of course, you are going to be laying criminal charges against the top 5 of the ANC. Now, we know there's a top 6. Currently, as you mentioned, and it's well documented that the Secretary General, Mr. Ace Magashule, is currently suspended by the party. So just describe for us the plan of action that you intend doing later on in this week.
As I've indicated, we will definitely go to the Johannesburg Central Police Station and lay those charges. I've tweeted earlier today that we will announce in the course of today when we will do so. There are members of the staff who have not previously been part of that group who wanted to lay the charges, who are now so outraged by what the management of the African National Congress is doing, also in terms of this illegal dismissal of me, that they have approached us and said that they want their names added to that group. So we're busy with that process. And as soon as we've concluded that and we're ready to go and lay the charges, we will do so. But I emphasize, there must be no doubt about it, we will most definitely go and lay those criminal charges against the national office bearers of the African National Congress. It is our civil and citizens' responsibility to do so. It is our responsibility as employees of the African National Congress. And I believe it is the responsibility of every member of the ANC who is concerned about the continuing existence and future and success of the ANC to support this action that we have decided to take.
Mr. Nyos, are you also trying to, I know you mentioned the Tripartite Alliance, the South African Communist Party, and COSATU. Are you hoping that they could come to the party also to assist the aggrieved workers? Because this is the crux of it, the aggrieved workers of the ANC in trying to say, listen, to the national office bearers, your staff need to be paid.
Of course, I would like to see every concerned South African, but especially those in the alliance, to come out in support of the workers. There had been a call from the African National Congress for crowdfunding. And I know that there are members of the population in South Africa, and especially members of the ANC, who have paid monies into that account of the ANC for this crowdfunding project. What I think those members have to do is to ask of the ANC how their money is being used, because they contributed out of sympathy with the plight of the workers. And surely that money should go towards the salaries of the workers. There are indications that in some instances there's now attempts to pay service providers that the ANC also owes money to with that money. That would be wrong. And I think that there has to be proper accounting so that those who have paid money to help workers that they have sympathy for can know that their money is being used in a proper way.
Mr. Nyos, I want to touch on the MKMVA situation, and of course the situation of either it being disbanded or not disbanded. What is the future now going forward with the MKMVA and its relationship with the ruling party?
At the beginning of this interview, you expressed sympathy with the passing on of our President, Comrade Kebby Maphatsi. And we have worked very hard as the Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association to implement the resolution of the 54th National Conference of the ANC that there must be a unity conference. We did so in conjunction with the Peace and Stability Subcommittee of the National Executive of the ANC, which is being chaired by Comrade Tony Ngeni. Now, there has been some disruptions and ructions because the NEC decided at one point now to appoint a new task team, and they also announced that the Umkhonto we Sizwe Military Veterans Association should be disbanded. We did not want to engage on that level. We do not want to come and fight about the disbanding of MKMVA, because you can't simply just disband an organization which has showed itself also over the past weekend of the funeral of its president to be well and alive. What we rather want to concentrate on is the work that has been done to bring about this unity conference. And MKMVA has dedicated itself now, and we issued a statement after our last National Executive Committee meeting to make sure that that unity conference will happen before the 60th anniversary of the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, which is to be held on the 16th of December of this year. So before then, we want a unity conference. We want the work that Comrade Kebby and so many others have dedicated themselves to come to fruition. And we want the National Executive of the African National Congress to assist us in doing so. Not in terms of fighting with us, not in terms of trying to impose the organization being disbanded, rather to constructively for the achievement of that unity conference, which will be an implementation of one of the resolutions, the 54th National Conference of the ANC.
Mr. Neus, one final question for yourself before we go ahead and conclude the show. By you being dismissed, it obviously means that you won't be able to potentially go ahead and carry out your activities within Luthuli House. Of course, this is pending, CCMA cases, labor court verdicts.
I can't hear your question.
Mr. Neus, can you hear me now? Mr. Neus? Mr. Neus? Are we going to try and get Mr. Carl Niehaus back here? Seems to be having a connection problem. That is technology with you. Let's see if we can get him. Mr. Niehaus, are you back on air? Seems to that we have went ahead and lost Mr. Carl Niehaus. Well, I think we are going to conclude the conversation right here. So it's going to be interesting to see what will go ahead and transpire with regards to this. Of course, in a democratic South Africa, we can go ahead and go to various courts. I think we do have Mr. Niehaus. Mr. Niehaus, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm back. Okay. I can hear you.
Not a problem. Mr. Niehaus, one final question for you. Of course, by you being dismissed, it could mean that you may not be able to carry out your activities in Luthuli House, but you are a current card-carrying member of the ruling party. So your future, because you've always said that you are a committed member of the ANC, pending the rulings of course, CCMAs or, the labor courts, whatever the decision comes from there, your commitment to the ANC, it's still there, am I right?
Oh, absolutely. Look, you must understand that recently they also imposed a temporary suspension on my membership, but I have appealed that. And I'm sure that will eventually be resolved. But my commitment to the African National Congress and my love for the ANC as a liberation movement that brought about democracy in South Africa together with the people of this country is unchallenged. And I will continue to express that support and that love for the African National Congress. That is why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why I'm also prepared, together with other employees of the ANC, to go and lay the criminal charges against the leadership of the African National Congress, not because I want to attack the ANC. I've got no intention to attack or to try and destroy the African National Congress, but as an act of trying to prevent a failing leadership from destroying the ANC and trying to assist as far as I can in my own humble way, together with many other comrades, to save this organization and to allow the ANC to continue to carry out its historical liberation task to fully liberate the people of South Africa. And that liberation task has to include also the full economic liberation of South Africans, which we do not yet have.
Mr. Carl Niehaus, MKMVA spokesperson and an NEC member of the organization and a current card-carrying member of the ANC, we'd like to say thank you so much for making the time for us and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Well, there we go. Let's wait to see what's going to be happening in the ruling party. Interesting developments happening there without the registrations in the metros and the municipalities. What is the future with regards to the ruling party in the upcoming local government elections? It's going to be interesting times right here in South Africa. Well, that's all we have for you here on the Daily Survival. From myself, Faraz Patel. We will see you again next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.